at the beginning, my wife was a law enforcement officer.
Mm-hmm.
She used to work for customs. And so when she walked in, she had her arms crossed. She was very guarded. What are they going to try and sell us here?
Mm-hmm.
But by the end of day 3, she was like, all right, you were born for this.
Mm.
And I had her full support. And because my entire business was a cash model, like people paying, $5, $10 at the door, $15 for a class or to come to the dance event. So I literally went home and grabbed $35,000 cash. And that's how I paid for this 2-year.
Oh my goodness.
the highest level of mentorship that they had, that included a one-on-one mentor that flew from Florida to California, spent 3 days with me one-on-one. Hey everyone, my name is Jorge Contreras and you are watching Entrepreneur Unleashed.
Jorge, thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for the opportunity.
100%. Like, you flew across the country to get here.
From the West Coast to the East Coast.
I'm telling you, I love it. I love it. Now, a lot of my community may already know you, but not everyone. So what I want to do first and foremost is just to help frame where you are today so they know who we're talking to, and then we'll jump into some of the backstories. Does that sound fair?
Absolutely.
So tell me a little bit more, like, what's going on right now in your life and your business?
Absolutely. So I am a husband, father of 2 girls who are 2 and 5.
Yes.
A real estate investor. We have a portfolio of 18 short-term rentals, 3 ground-up developments, 2 apartment buildings, and I also own a Airbnb coaching program where we've helped a couple thousand members get on the path to financial freedom.
I love it. I love it. Now, the real question though is, like, how did you get here, right? Because a lot of business owners are always interested in figuring out, like, what are the steps that get to outcome. Like, we're seeing and talking about your outcome right now, just in this moment. But what are all the steps that led to getting to that outcome? Because I'm a big believer in mentorship.
Absolutely.
And really reverse engineering, right? So let's talk a little bit about, like, how you even, like, got started. Like, you weren't always in real estate, right?
Not at all.
Like, tell me a little bit about some of that background.
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, I started my first business when I was 20. I became a professional dancer, and I was teaching bachata. For those who are not aware, it's a sensual partner dance from the Dominican Republic.
Okay.
And I went on to create 8 streams of income from the dance. I started the 2 largest bachata festivals in Los Angeles, a nightclub. I used to be a promoter and do a lot of concerts. I brought Prince Royce for $5,000 to a nightclub in LA. It was one of his first gigs back in like 2010, 2009. Wow. I also used to own a choreography company. And long story short, it was a great business, but it always needed me in order for it to operate. So I was wearing all the hats, trading time for money. It was no different than the JOB. And I ended up getting an injury in my L5S1. I had a herniated disc.
Oh, goodness.
Went from not being able to dance to not being able to run to not being able to walk to the surgeon saying the day before my surgery, it'd be a 50-50 chance I'd ever walk again.
Oh, my goodness.
So that was the turning point that led me, like, how do I make money? They say that when you ask better questions, you get better answers. So my question was, how do I make money not using my body and my hands? Like, how do I use my brain? And I had no idea where that was going to take me, but that ended up taking me down the path of real estate. Of course, surgery was successful. 4 hours after the surgery, I was able to lift my leg without sciatic pain. And yeah, I just went all in on real estate. That was my first venture that led me into this direction.
Interesting. It's funny just to say, like, getting paid with your brain. I had my kids at the studio today because today was like taking kids to work day.
Nice.
So they came out here to the studio, and I was talking with both Ryan and Victoria, and I was talking with them about, like, the whole concepts of how to get paid, right? You can either work with your muscles or you can work with your mind. And we went through, like, this exercise. Like, what was it that taught you about, like, the mind ability, like the ability to make money with, like, thinking? And, like, were you exposed to something? Did you read a book? Did you get a mentor that taught you? Like, how did you learn?
Great question. It really began with Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Okay.
One of my dance students, she had a very successful online business where she was making like over $500,000 in like her early 20s, which is kind of crazy.
Oh my goodness.
And people had told me prior to her to read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, but they weren't very successful, so I never read the book until Nicole told me. I read the book, and that led me to start searching online, like, how do I learn about investing in real estate? Next thing you know, I see an ad from Les Brown. It says, you don't have to be great to get started, but you have to get started to be great. He was hosting a convention for 5,000 people free at the LA Convention Center.
Wow.
I went to this one-day event, and they were selling every course, under the clouds.
Yeah.
And one of them was by a company called Elite Legacy, who was doing a partnership at the time with Robert Kiyosaki.
Okay.
So it was a 3-day real estate event, $300. I went with it. I took my wife. And at the end of the 3 days, I invested, tens of thousands of dollars into the mentorship. And that's where things really changed for me. The biggest, change was I had a one-on-one mentor as part of my education. Her name's Mary Jo Wilson. And she's the one that taught me how to think from paying off your house to using leverage and using equity. I was like, wow, this is so foreign to me. But it was the mindset coaching that I got from Rich Dad where I just went to another level. And that was 9 years ago in 2015.
Wow. So getting exposed to a book, text, if you will, getting exposed to other humans doing things that you had never done before, right?
Yes.
And pushing yourself beyond your comfort zone. Because quite frankly, it's not easy for people to do this stuff,
It's
right?
not.
So what about you and your background gave you the ability to push beyond your comfort zone?
Well, I've always been a risk taker.
Okay.
But I knew that I needed the right guidance because taking risk at uneducated things or at the wrong thing could end up you could end up in a very bad situation. So I wanted to get educated and take some calculated risk. And that's why I decided to invest in myself and sharpen my saw, learn from multimillionaires who already had the result that I wanted. So I believe that when you combine the right education with being a risk taker, that's when you're able to create extraordinary results.
Okay. Well, you said you went to the event with your wife, right? So she's all in with you in this program?
Not at the beginning.
Okay.
So at the beginning, my wife was a law enforcement officer. She used to work for customs. And so when she walked in, she had her arms crossed. She was very guarded. What are they going to try and sell us here? But by the end of day 3, she was like, all right, you were born for this. And I had her full support. And because my entire business was a cash model, like people paying, $5, $10 at the door, $15 for a class or to come to the dance event. So I literally went home and grabbed $35,000 cash. And that's how I paid for this 2-year.
Oh my goodness.
the highest level of mentorship that they had that included a one-on-one mentor that flew from Florida to California, spent 3 days with me one-on-one.
Wow.
As well as everything else that came with it. But that was the biggest needle mover for me.
Now, when you were jumping into it, what were the hesitations? What roadblocks did you first encounter?
Well, it was definitely a mindset roadblock because up until 2015, I had one house that I owned in 2012, which was my primary residence where I was doing some house hacking, created additional units. I was renting out all the bedrooms at the time. I wasn't married, was not with my wife at the time, single, no kids. So I just rented the rooms as a way to leverage the mortgage payment. But in addition to sending my mortgage payment, I would send $3,000 to $5,000 every month to the mortgage payment. So I was on track to paying it off in the first 8 years.
Okay.
And then when I got my mentor in Rich Dad, she said, that'll be great. You'll be, 32, home will be paid off. She said, but guess what? You'll still be stuck in a rat race.
Correct.
And I was like, ouch.
Yeah.
I was like, well, what should I do? And she took out a notebook, 8x11 white sheet of paper. She taught me about a refinance cash out, which I wasn't that familiar with at the time. And at the time, she broke down how I could take out $160,000 of equity. She said, my advice is go and buy 2 more houses because in 10 years or 15 years, when those houses are all, double the value, she said, you'll have 3 times the equity instead of just once. With just one. And that's exactly what I did. I went and bought 2 houses, did more house hacking, and then that led me down the short-term rental model.
Wow. So house hacking in and of itself is like an amazing concept.
Oh yeah,
right?
it's so awesome.
Tell the audience a little bit more about that. Like help someone maybe who has no familiarity at all.
Absolutely. So what I would do since 2012 up until 2020 is I would buy a single family home. I would do what's called a junior ADU. So I would split within the existing habitable space. So if the home is 2,000 square feet, maybe I put 1,000 on this side, 1,000 on this side. And just by, closing, maybe drywalling a hallway, opening a door in one of the bedrooms where there wasn't a door, and in that same room adding a kitchenette that would also be the living room, and I would live on one unit and I would Airbnb the other unit and I would live mortgage payment free. Wow. That was like one thing I did with 5 of my houses. Every couple of years I would buy a new primary residence, house hack, live in one, Airbnb the other, live mortgage payment free, and then practice delayed gratification. So all that money that would have gone towards mortgage payments out of my pocket, which I no longer had to. I would just buy more properties with like 5% down, 5% down, 5% down.
Wow. That, like the concept itself can be kind of stressful for a lot of people to become comfortable with, because not everyone is like keen on living with other humans, like literally right within their own home, or even if you do have a little bit of a drywall situation separating the two of you. Like how do you help other business owners get beyond that? Because I know you do a lot of coaching and you give a lot of counsel. Like how can you get someone's mindset to say, listen, let's just get over it. Let's just get to work building real wealth, so that in the future you don't have to ever worry about that again.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I understand is that it's not a good fit for everybody, right? And some people may be way beyond that. Like I wouldn't do that today where I am. That wouldn't make sense, certainly for you, Edward. But for someone who is like, I want to get out of a 9-to-5, or they want to build up a larger savings account, or they just want to invest more of their money, almost everyone's largest expense is their mortgage payment or their rent if they live by themselves. So if you can get rid of your mortgage payment or your rent payment by finding some type of leverage with house hacking, most people would be halfway, if not more, to becoming financially free, right? Like if their total monthly expenses are $5,000 and their rent alone is $2,500 or $3,000, I mean, that's a huge chunk.
Yeah.
Like you're more than halfway there. So it's really this concept of investing for the future. I'm also a big believer, in my investments are going to be the majority of my retirement account. Okay. And not just relying on, Social Security or a 401k. Like I want to actually drive my retirement through real estate. And just practicing delayed gratification, right? Like I didn't really buy any nice cars until like 2 years ago. I didn't buy my dream home until 2 years ago, even though I was already a multimillionaire. I was living in a community where the average income was like $75,000 a year that I just kept reinvesting again and again and again. And now we own a lot of real estate and we can really do whatever we want now. Right?
Financial freedom is beautiful.
It took, really 10 years of delayed gratification.
But that, I mean, at the end of the day, that's the sacrifice that you put in, right? You have to do the reps. Yep. You have to actually get the results over time. It doesn't happen overnight, right? So when you're looking at where you are now, like your operation is pretty diverse, right? You have different aspects of business enterprise. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit more about that. Like, let's talk about the coaching business first and foremost. Like, tell me more about that. Like, what is it that you're doing specifically, and how are you doing it?
That's a great question. So in 2017, I had a vision to merge financial literacy and personal development. I wanted to create something where we can give people an alternative to the regular education system, right? I asked myself, like, what would it be like if people had the option to, I do want to go to a 4-year, college and get a degree. Great. But what about for those who want to become entrepreneurs and investors? Like, what if there was an alternative option? And I consider my company that alternative option, as many others out there. We teach them financial literacy, investments, even though I'm not we connect them with the right, tax people, legal people for the asset protection, a whole, full tax and wealth creation strategy. And that's really what it is we're merging financial literacy and personal development to help people create time freedom and personal freedom to really allow them to get their time in life back so they can live life on their terms, which is not something that is taught in our upbringing.
That's very true.
We are the solution to the problem.
I was having a conversation with another business owner, and we were talking about the downfall of the American educational system, right? It's the pure lack of financial literacy that exists there. I'm kind of curious, like you have kids. Yes. Like what's your thought process with regard to exposing them to like the challenges that are part of the American system?
Well, the first thing is we homeschool our kids and we involve them in all kinds of extracurricular activities. Even a entrepreneur, like my 5-year-old is in a CEO program in Orange County where we live. And in May, she'll graduate with, a little business event where she'll have a little storefront and people are going to come and shop. So we expose our kids to everything that we do. Yeah. Even when we're traveling, when I host my masterminds with my students, I'll bring my daughters. They're sitting with me in the front. When I speak at events, I'll bring my my 5-year-old to the front, and I'll have her say her affirmations in front of hundreds of people.
I love that.
And I have this one video where I specifically say, Catalea, I want to normalize this. It's normal in our family to be a leader. It's normal in our family to lead from the front. Whatever she wants to do with it, maybe she wants to become an employee one day. Great. Maybe she wants to become an entrepreneur. I want her to have options, the options that were not presented to me when I was a kid. And I think that's the biggest thing. I'm not going to force her. I'm definitely going to influence her.
Yes.
Because you and I know that,
Yes.
you know, if you're going to build someone empire, might as well be yourself, you know, for yourself, you know, build your own last name instead of someone else's. And we know all the tax benefits that come that you don't get in a 9-to-5. So I have a really strong feeling my girls will be entrepreneurs, but either way, they will have the options. And maybe I'll help them get a job and be like, hey, I want you to try this job for 3 months and see how you like it. And then let's go and start a business for 3 months and like, maybe you decide. So more than anything, it's exposure to options and opportunities.
I love that. When you look at your business, again, the diverse aspects of what you have, you're actually running a real estate business at the same time as helping others learn how to do that same thing.
Yes.
Like, tell me more about your day-to-day, like, physical real estate business.
That's a great question. So there's a couple different components. One of my favorite quotes from Tony Robbins is always be working on 2 businesses, he said, the business you're in and the business you need to be in. So I'm in the business of short-term rentals. I love short-term rentals. I'm able to get more cash flow, short-term rental loopholes, which you always talk about, and I love it for that reason. I'm also smart enough to know that they might not always be here unless I go and buy a hotel and do a boutique hotel, and that's always an option. So I ask myself again, because I'm always reinventing myself. I'm always thinking of what's going to be here that's going to outlive me, that's going to outlive my grandchildren, and that's apartment buildings. Unfortunately, we are becoming a nation of renters.
Yes.
And you know, most people today cannot afford to rent a house or buy a house with the interest rate environment. So a lot of people are going to be moving into apartment buildings. And so last year I started buying apartments and raising capital. And doing a lot of value add strategies.
So syndication?
Yeah, syndication. So we have a couple apartment buildings, a couple ground up developments, and I'm focusing on all 3 right now. Well, just finishing the 3 developments, but moving forward, it's going to be apartment buildings and single family homes for short-term rentals. So the apartments will be long-term, stabilized, you know, tenants, value add strategy, and then the single families will always be short-term rentals.
Interesting. Now, have you gotten into any like creative events, like things like doing like residential assisted living or any of those types of programs? Like,
have not,
no,
you know, got my toes dipped in.
How do you actually manage your empire though? Like what is your process for managing the businesses that you have?
Yeah, good question. So I'm sure you're familiar, maybe the audience is not. There's a book by Michael E. Gerber. He talks about the 3 levels of entrepreneur and E-Myth. It's like that, right? The technician, the manager, the visionary. So anytime I'm starting a new business or a new leg or an arm of a new business, that ties into the primary, the first thing I ask myself is, who's going to be the manager? Because I know I'm not going to manage it. Also, as a visionary, and you know, with 16 years of entrepreneurship experience, like I'm not that executor. Someone needs to execute the vision. So if I'm either going to partner with someone, maybe an integrator, or I'm going to hire an integrator, depending on the situation, depending on the business. But that is the first question: is who's going to execute my vision and make it come a reality?
Interesting. Just
like when Steve Jobs came up with the iPhone idea, Steve Wozniak was the engineer behind it all.
Yeah, right.
And a lot of people don't know that, but yeah.
When you look at finding that team, the right individuals, how do you source them? Like, what are you doing as a business owner to source those candidates?
That's a good question. So one, there's a lot of relationships just through social media.
Okay.
As well as I host a monthly in-person meetup event in Los Angeles for my real estate community. And of course, just on my content. So I'm always meeting new people. Right now I'm in the East Coast and I'm meeting people here.
Exactly.
Right. And so I'm just always creating connections, even when I go to masterminds, when I go to, you know, ClickFunnels or whatever mastermind, I'm just always meeting people. And that's one of my superpowers actually, is recognizing personality types and knowing what's the right chair for them.
Interesting. Now, how do you like actually structure like the job description though? Like, because the whole concept, you and I, we talk about integrators a lot, right? Just based on everything that we get exposed to. Yeah. But how does like someone who may not have been exposed to that concept understand how to identify the right people for the right role?
Yeah, so I've never read this book, but every time I've recommended it to a lot of people because I've listened to the short version on YouTube, and it's Traction. No, not Traction. It's what's the other one by Gino Wickman, where he talks about visionary and integrator. It's
I know which one you mean. And
we'll mention it in the notes. But there's a book that specifically talks about, I didn't read it because I already knew exactly what it is. But whenever I have someone that says like, oh, how can I learn more? I'm like, oh, check out this book by Gino Wickman. And in the book, it outlines, how do you know if you're a visionary? How do you know if you're an integrator? What are the roles and responsibilities? What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? And how do they perfectly work together? And so I think it's really important for people to learn the differences and how you can, bring in either a partner or a hire. I don't believe that you need both to start a business, but I believe you need both to scale and grow a business. Again, whether you partner with someone or whether you hire someone. I do want to mention that it is very difficult to hire a visionary because visionaries will always build their own thing. Yeah. So if you're an integrator, you may want to partner with the visionary. And if you're a visionary, you could either partner or hire the integrator. But visionaries will not stick around. They always want to build their own thing. So this is why I recognize if I'm looking at hiring someone and I have a 2-3 minute conversation, I'll be like, I can't hire that person. They won't stick around for more than 6 months. They'll learn this information and go build their own thing. And that's cool, but that's not how I'm going to be able to scale businesses. Right. I want people that are going to be here for the next 20 years with me. So you gotta, otherwise you're just, wasting time being ineffective.
Yes. But when you look at the journey, right? Like a lot of business owners will get to a point where they hit a roadblock and they don't push through, right? Well, there's lots of businesses that have failed, but if they took 3 or 4 more steps, it would have been fine. Like, what are some of the challenges that you experienced building this, and what were the things that helped you push through?
That's a great question. So one of the things that has always helped me push through is just always finding a way to pivot. Like, I'll give you a perfect example. In my coaching program that I started in 2018, at the time, I had only bought real estate and did Airbnb. I had never done arbitrage or the management side. Okay. And then what happened is students started buying properties with not the proper loans, in short. And then it was like, whoa, this is actually not a good idea. Everybody could probably get in trouble for this. And I never imagined that my coaching program was going to blow up. I was just sharing what I was doing, like documenting my journey on Instagram, and then people started asking me how do you do it? Next thing you know, I'm teaching people for free. And then I was like, man, these people don't value my time. So I started charging. And then I was like, man, I need some help. And that's when I started investing in mentors, which we could talk about later. But long story short, oh, geez, I just lost my train of thought. Where were we?
With regards to the roadblocks.
The roadblocks. Yeah. So when my students started to buy properties with the wrong loans, I had a conversation with my lender, and we're like, you know what, we shouldn't be helping people do these loans. Like, these are primary mortgage. They shouldn't be renting these out. Long story short, I pivoted. I started doing subleasing myself. At the time, I thought my coaching business was going to disappear because I'm like, well, I can't help people do this at scale. Not a good idea. They're not doing the right thing. I don't want to get in trouble. Right. So once I did a couple arbitrage and that helped me replace my wife's 9-to-5, it was like, whoa, is anyone even interested in this strategy? So I started talking about it, and my program grew by 500% in 12 months. Just shocking. Wow. I was like, what in the world? And then I just came to realize that there was a much bigger pool of people who are not in a position to buy real estate, but they could implement rental arbitrage, where they rent a property and then re-rent it on Airbnb. And it's a short-term strategy. Obviously, the goal is to own, implement the whole cost egg and short-term rental loophole. But I'm also a big believer in do what you can with what you have where you are. Like, if you could buy, amazing. Let's go buy and start building wealth. But what about for those that are not in a position to buy, or not in a position to, get the capital to buy? How can you help them? And that's where the subleasing, interestingly enough, in 2024 and for the last 4 years, like 90% of my students are doing subleasing versus buying real estate.
Huh. I mean, it's beautiful because you're creating an opportunity for them to find cash flow, and then they can ultimately store that capital, right? Yeah. For the acquisition of something down the road. But you really want speed, right?
Yes.
You want speed to value creation.
Yes.
And you are essentially creating an opportunity for them to get access to something that is really valuable, which is cash flow, by just teaching them the right steps. When you look at, again, your journey from a roadblock standpoint, what was the biggest challenge you had to get through in order to be where you are today?
That's a great question. The biggest challenge. We actually might go pretty deep here, if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
So I had a lot of, like crazy challenges in my upbringing, but the biggest challenge was when my dad passed away from alcohol when I was 12. But the story that I created is, if the person that I love the most didn't stick around, why would anybody else stick around? So what started to happen is, in my 20s with my dance business, I would attract a lot of amazing, very sharp individuals that wanted to grow the businesses with me, but I would always keep them at arm's distance because I didn't know how to trust people.
Right.
I didn't want to commit to anyone because commitment equaled vulnerability, equaled at some point they're going to do me wrong.
Yeah.
And so that was my biggest roadblock, is I didn't trust people. I didn't want to form alliances. I was like a professional relationship sabotager. I was just pushing people away until I went through enough personal development where I was able to identify this abandonment issue, not being able to trust people, not wanting to be vulnerable, and in my personal life too. So when I did all this personal development that really began in 2016, and I started to trust people and be vulnerable and authentic, and I could make eye contact with people, that's when things really started to change, because I learned to trust myself, I learned to trust other people, and now my relationships are thriving. But that was my biggest challenge on the personal side and on the business side.
When you look at your trust issues, right? Obviously, there's issues with regard to trusting other humans in this regard. But what about like trust from just the concept, like trusting that the concept can work? Like how do you build up the fortitude to be able to have faith that there are ways to accomplish something that, because you and I didn't learn this stuff in school, right? This is not taught by in the American school system, right? We didn't learn about how to create financial freedom. We had to learn from others who had actually created it, right? How did you learn to trust in the possibility of the outcome? Yeah,
absolutely. What I would do is I would just start small, right? I always tell my students, like, focus on progress, not perfection. I never know, what 10 years from now or 10 steps from now is going to look. But that first step, like, I could see that. Like, I think the best analogy, forgot who said it, but like if you're driving and it's pitch black, but you have your lights on, you could see about 300 feet in front of you. You can't see beyond that, but it's like the further you drive, you can see more and more and more and more. So for me, it's just trusting enough that I can see that next step and then just building from there. I think that for me has always worked. It's just not focusing on this massive picture that might be unattainable right now, but just taking small steps, like the whole concept of becoming like 1% better every day and just trusting the process.
When you look at the next steps then, like what are the next steps for you?
Starting today?
Yeah.
That's a great question. So the thing I'm most passionate about is the real system, which is the coaching side.
Okay.
I get way more excited when I hear that one of my students helped his wife quit her job and now she can spend more time with their 3-year-old than like the 24-unit apartment building we closed in LA a few weeks ago. Right. Like the apartments or even the Airbnbs, like it's really cool and it's great for taxes, but there's not a lot of substance. Like there's not a lot of personal, like it doesn't feel the same.
Yeah,
right?
It's not fulfillment.
It's not fulfillment. And so it just feels so great when I do help someone and I get paid for it. I don't feel like there's anything better in the world than getting paid to change people's lives. And so I'm just in love with the process. I'm in love with the transformation, the outcome that people are able to create. Because, I mean, you look at the economy today, right? Like, I feel we're in a silent depression. The economic numbers are in many ways worse than they were in the Great Depression. And people are really struggling because of the financial system that we've been brought up in. So, like, my mission is to give people an alternative, to provide them with a solution so that they don't have to struggle like they are right now.
How do you see this unfolding? Because we're talking about the economy for a second.
Yeah.
And I have very strong opinions about this. Like, it's a mess.
It's a mess. It's really bad.
A mess.
It's so bad.
And if people don't take control of their financial tomorrow, starting today, like, it's disaster territory ahead. So how do you help people recognize that the challenges that are literally on the horizon? Like, because I feel that it's important to help people see what the possibilities are that are challenging in order to help motivate them today to get and take action. It's sort of like I was having another conversation with a group of people, and we were talking about like healthcare, right? If your doctor comes in and tells you you're about to have a heart attack, you'll probably do something a little bit different. And that's sort of like the thing I'm getting involved in when it comes to teaching people about financial literacy. I talk about, listen, there is disaster on the horizon. Mm-hmm. You need to become financially literate today so that you don't drive off the cliff. Like, how do you do it? How do you help your students, your community? How do you help them understand that?
That's a great question. You know, something I learned from Myron Golden, he says, create an environment that makes people want to buy and sell to people who want to buy what you have to sell. Mm-hmm. So the audience that I have, right, which is mainly 9-to-5ers, mm-hmm. who are already experiencing enough pain and challenges financially, personally, lack of time with family, not being able to live life on their terms or travel or whatever that may be for them. They're already experiencing that pain, so they're already looking for a solution. And when they look at, for example, my Instagram, they might see testimonials or my properties or case studies, and they're like, wow, that's the financial and personal freedom I want. Mm-hmm. So it really starts there, them experiencing pain, seeing what's possible for them. Mm-hmm. And then it starts with education, right? I believe the more you know about something, the less risky it is. And so it starts with educating them about inflation mm-hmm. and interest rates and how you could either buy a home or rent a home, how to get business credit, how to start an LLC. A lot of very basic principles that most of them are like, oh, wow, I didn't know I could start an LLC, or I didn't know it only took X amount of time or cost. So it's really building that foundation of money, investing, but more than anything, the mindset, right? Teaching them a high income skill. I consider Airbnb a high income skill because it's an active income where you could really accelerate your cash flow. And that's really the first thing. And then building and owning assets over a long-term period.
One of the things I love about you is that, like, even in our conversation now, you've dropped a couple names, right? You've dropped a couple names of people that you've looked up to or gotten counsel from or guidance from. That is obviously the concept of mentorship.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about your experience with mentorship and like what your opinion is.
Yeah.
Fill me in.
Man, I would not be here today on this podcast if it wasn't for my mentor. So like I'm standing on the shoulders of my mentors. Mm-hmm. I personally have invested more in myself than some people pay for a house.
Oh yeah.
You know, like I've just always have had mentors. And so I've always looked for people that have the result that I want, where, you know, it started with real estate and all kinds of real estate courses, different strategies, then the tax side, the legal side, the whole, I think you call it the real wealth matrix.
Yes.
And then from there, when I started helping people, I started investing in myself to learn how to help more people. So just like Myron Goldman and Russell Brunson and many other people out there, but I am a product of everyone that I have learned from. Like I would not be here if it wasn't for them. That's the only reason I became financially free, that I became successful, is because the people that I learned from. So I am 100% a believer in mentorship, and I'm so grateful.
If you had to share like one lesson that you learned from a mentor that was like the most transformative lesson you could have learned, like what would that lesson be?
There's a couple, but one of them is work on the business, not in the business, right? Because when you're working in the business, that's how I was stuck in my first business, my dance business, where I was wearing all the hats, trading time for money. Mm-hmm. So when I first heard work on the business, I was like, oh, wow, what a concept. Also, another one from Tony Robbins, he says, you don't build a business, you build the people, and the people build the business. That one is really good too. Just a lot of business principles that have completely changed my perspective around business and life.
Yeah, it is about perspective though, right? Like if you want to operate a 7-figure business, well, the very first step you have to take is, what would the owner of a 7-figure business be like?
Yeah.
Right? How does their brain work? How do they make decisions? And if you're not currently that person, then you have to go to work on yourself. A lot of people focus on trying to work and fix the business, but they fail to fix themselves. Like, it's very difficult to fix something if you don't know how to do that, right? Yeah. So you have to invest in yourself. You have to put time, effort, and energy to craft the person that can run a 7-figure business. If you want an 8-figure business, it's the same scenario, right? You have to do the work to become the 8-figure business owner, right? I talk about this as what I call it. It's the law of prerequisites, meaning you have to do the thing before you can become the thing.
Yes.
Right. It's like if you want to be healthy, you don't say, oh, I'm going to start eating healthy after I become healthy. No. You have to eat healthy first to become healthy. Oh, physical fitness. I'm gonna go to the gym once I get into shape. No, you have to go to the gym in order to get into shape, right? And the same thing happens with wealth and with business, right? If you want to become wealthy, that doesn't mean you do the things that wealthy people do after. No, you have to do the things that they do now so that you can become wealthy. And business ownership is the same way. When you look at the business you want to build, what are the things that you need to do starting today in order to build it out? Like the business that you want to have 5 years from now, what are the things you think you need to do now, or at least work on now, to get there?
I got to build a studio just like this. No, it's a true story. You know, I have since 2017, I've had my whole company's been virtual, 100%, and it's worked up to this point. And I have a studio, you know, in my backyard where I film everything. But I always ask myself, what would it look like, or how would my business evolve if I had a studio that was specifically for everything, just all the content? Because as far as my highest lever in my business is, it's creating content. Because without content, there's no eyeballs, and if there's no eyeballs, there's no transformation. The business is not growing, and so I really believe it's building a professional studio for all things content. My YouTube, my solo podcast that needs to become a guest podcast, for the Instagram reels, just really because, again, that's my biggest domino.
Yeah, I look at, again, I've been having so many conversations with business owners over the course of the past couple of weeks, and we were talking about this concept of attention, right? And in order to get to the next level, you have to capture more and more and more attention. So what we're doing online, this was foreign to me, right? Like, you know me, I don't come from the internet world. I learned this stuff like relatively recently, and I'm still learning. I'm nowhere near good, but I'm definitely better than when I started. I'm curious, like, because I think I look at you and I see an amazing entrepreneur, someone who's accomplished so much. But you're also doing it out in the open, too. You're online. Like, were you ever hesitant about doing that? Was that ever something that you were challenged by?
Yeah.
Because I look at, because I get a lot of questions from business owners, like, how can I take my business to the next level? And one of the ways you have to do it is to get more traffic, right? To get more people knowing who you are and what you're doing. So what are some insights you've discovered along the way?
As far as building an audience?
Yes.
What's interesting, because even all these real estate projects we're doing now where we're raising capital, the majorities come from people that have met me online. They saw an ad, became a student. Once they were in my community, they came to a webinar. And it's just so interesting how for teaching people, raising capital, partnerships, some of my business partners, like, we met through finding each other's content. It's just crazy, like, how much the world has changed. Like, content is everything, you know? And yeah, as far as building an audience, you know, it's interesting because when I started my dance business, by 2010, I already had over 10 million views on YouTube in my dance business, right? And so a lot of people, well, in the dance community, when I got to travel to over 25 countries teaching, performing bachata, and people knew me like everywhere I went from the dance community.
Right.
And it was interesting because when I transitioned into the real estate world, you know, obviously the same thing started happening with time. And so in a way, I'm kind of used to it. Like, I'm 36 now. I started creating content when I was 20 for my dance business. Like, I had instructional DVDs that I was selling in 2009. I didn't know that I could sell them as a downloadable. So it was like physical CDs. Yeah, physical CDs. But I have asked myself a few times, like, man, what would life be like if I get to the point where I can't really go anywhere and, like, you can't go to a movie with your wife or with your kids because everybody wants a picture. And sometimes you see that with really famous people, and it's like, man, like I kind of don't want that. But then it's like, well, imagine all the impact. So I don't know, but I'm pushing through and I'm still creating the content. But my biggest focus is, creating the biggest impact in the short amount of time that we have.
Well, I know that in a little bit we're going to be jumping into a separate conversation on our members-only podcast.
Yeah.
And we're going to really dive into some actual tactics there.
Yep.
But before we leave this particular platform, I'd love to know, like, if you were to give one practical piece of counsel to someone who's looking to get to that next level, what would it be?
It would be whatever it is that is your goal. Find someone that has already accomplish the goal that you want, go and pay them and learn from them or shadow them, whatever it takes. But go and learn from someone that already has the results and outcome that you want, right? Just like the book, Who Not How. The answer is not always how, it's really who can help me get there bigger, better, faster, stronger.
All right, I love it. Thank you so much for coming here. I know the audience got amazing value from it. How can they reach out to you if they wanted to learn a little bit more about your situation and what you're doing? What's the best way to contact you?
Instagram, the Jorge Contreras.
Excellent. I'll make sure that that's in the show notes so everyone gets access to it. I appreciate you. And for everyone watching and listening, I hope you've gotten as much value out of this experience as I have. We're going to be jumping into a members-only version of this podcast where we're going to jump into specific tactics to take your life and your business to the next level. But until next time, if you're not in that members-only environment, well, you probably might want to give that a second thought. Until next time, be well. Bye for now.